Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to the channel RPG with DBJ. I'm your host, DBJ. And today, as we do every World Building Wednesday, we're going to take the subject we've been talking about all week long, which is the dungeon crawl dead? You know, do do we keep this thing around or get rid of it? Right? Do we save it? Do we skip it and go, yeah, it had its time, but maybe I might pull it out every once in a while? Or do we slay it and go, yeah, this thing ain't, yeah, it's had its time. Uh, so long, dungeon crawls. You suck, right? Okay, so where are we going to leave it at? Where are we going to take it? Well, for those who don't know, we take a subject and we talk about it all week long. And today is World Building Wednesday, which means that, yeah, we're going to build a world where dungeon crawling is the world. And we are going to go about incorporating all of the other elements that we have for our gaming, all the narrative stuff, all the hippie storytelling, player agency stuff we indie gamers love to have. We're going to incorporate all that. But I have to start this out with two completely divergent but topical comments that were left from earlier this week. So this comes from Alan. And Alan says, I always have a dungeon crawl at the end of my, a dragon at the end of my dungeon crawl, unless playing Tunnels and Trolls, then there's a troll at the end of the tunnel. Enjoyed the video, which is hilarious, right? But someone says, listening to this, it becomes very obvious why dungeon crawling still has a place in the hobby. Okay, the distilled danger gives everyone a place to create the memory of a shared experience, and I hadn't really thought about that part. To overcome those dangers and avoid and to evade death is always going to be epic. And I didn't bring up the fact, I didn't bring up the shared experience of it. A lot of dungeon crawling, the absurd Gygaxian creatures, the 10-foot poleisms, they're the despite the absurdity of some dungeon crawling, I guess there is a shared experience, and maybe that's a part of the value of role playing. That yeah. Red Dice Star is like, yeah, hippie storyteller, yeah, you bunch of long haired hippies letting your players just make up stuff on the fly. Yeah. Anyway, but listen to this one. This is from Augustin Rodriguez. Thank you very much. Says, I really like the way you express yourself. Thank you for sharing. And he goes on to say, now this is a little mouthful, right? My take on the matter. I absolutely despise dungeon crawling. My perspective is this: a dungeon is as clever as an overdone fantasy rat maze. You can make a nice layout, put some ingenious riddles and traps, put treasure here, monsters there, and as far as I'm concerned, kill your setting instantly. I wonder if he's got an opinion. Who built this place and why and how? Did they put the magical treasure at the end of the acid-filled corridor, guided by 46 ogres, 20 meters underground to do what? Certainly not to have access to it. Well, to pose a challenge to the players, of course. Dungeons are obstacle courses with no purpose other than to be a gauntlet to be run by the PCs. Sorry about having my head down, guys. The illusion of a world quickly dies and is replaced by nonsense. I wonder if this person really has an opinion. Goes on to say, I understand the mechanical advantages, but it's transparently artificial. Even if the design is clever, attempting to sell me that there is a real world around the rat maze is absurd. It reminds me of Prince of Persia, which I didn't bring up before. I Prince of Persia went through my mind, but I couldn't remember the name. And we're live, and you guys know me. Anyway, he goes on to say, it reminds me of Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, where doors are opened by pressure plates 20 meters off the ground, only accessible via the game's acrobatic system, which was great fun. Loved every second of it. But come on, they built it like that? Really? Really? That's all caps, guys. Doorknobs. No, no, no. We want a giant pressure plate over a deadly drop with a timer and retractable spikes on the wall to make it interesting. Next, you're going to tell me that they use levers to operate drawbridges instead of bicycles that recite riddles and release poison gas if you get 3 wrong. Anyway, the comment goes on, and I love the way he worded it. Yeah, we've got 2 camps, guys, and so today might be a little bit daunting, but I did want to bring that up. That there's classic dungeon crawling. Should we keep it or not? The answer is whoa. Red Dice Diary says, I think this person's disagreement seemed to be with bad dungeons, and yes, there are lots of bad dungeons, but bad modules aren't limited to to dungeon crawls. There is okay. I think part of it too is looking past the curtain. So, because part of his comment was like, his point was, I don't care how well designed it is. It doesn't make any sense for there to be this thing in the world, right? And now listen, role-playing games have an absurdity all to themselves. Dungeon crawling or not, there's an absurdity to it anyway, right? Different rules for characters than the rest of the world. The fact that, I don't know, living, speaking, talking, sentient dragons exist is a little bit of absurd. And so in Dungeons and Dragons or any other game, there's usually an absurdity in it. But I think his point is that we know what a dungeon crawl is. So when we see it, if we can't wrap our heads around it, it becomes it's like you can see the puppeteer past the puppet and you can't not unsee it, right? And I think that's his point. The comment does go on to talk about like having a rationality for the dungeon, meaning like now that we're talking about World Building Wednesday, let me do a hard segue into our world building today, because the point of World Building Wednesday is we're going to build a world where dungeon crawling is the world. So whatever subject we talk about during the week, we're going to build a world wrapped around whatever subject it is. And for me, I put the challenge out, and I try not to do any research on it. I try not to think about it too hard because I want it to become natural. So I think there's something in pop culture that is a dungeon crawl that we tend to ignore as a dungeon crawl because we never call it that. I feel like a world built around a dungeon crawl is your classic war movies of any age, be it medieval, although I suspect that a lot of World War I-ism styled flavor to me seems like the very nature of what a dungeon crawling world would be like. Now, I think if we're going to talk, I'm going to get to the point on this one as well, why I feel that way. But I would even add to it, imagine a world that's been not just post-apocalyptic, but actively post-apocalyptic. Actively post-apocalyptic. The sky's been burned. There's acid rain. Humanity has very limited access to the upper reaches of the world. It's dangerous. There's maybe very few safe havens anywhere. If you find a safe haven, it will go away at some point. This trope has been used plenty of times in zombie post-apocalyptic natures. Very, very few times do the protagonists find a safe place to live and stay there. Um, yeah, Red Dice says, I think Earth Dawn had a similar concept where people had gone underground due to some sort of disaster. Yes, literally and figuratively, I'm thinking humanity has had to run underground. And it could be because of maybe 40K is the wrong thing to pull on, but there could be some multi-generational war that has happened that has burned the sky and the land and all the safe places. There could have been something extra, I'll say extraterrestrial, but not in the spaceship sense, but extraplanar, something summoned, something created or whatever that has populated the world, that is scourging, ripping any living thing asunder that exists out there. And the reason why I bring up war movies is because we focus on a lot of the high action in a war movie, right? The protagonist dodging explosions and traps and people shooting at them, and then of course the shooting gets a little closer. Maybe they start pulling out pistols, and then at another time, then they start having hand to hand fights. And I'm thinking World War One. We have trenches, we have barbed wire, and such. And I was trying to come up with a rationale for why a world would have traps, right? And war is a pretty good excuse for having traps set up some kind of way. All kind of traps, whether there's landmines or pit traps or heck, unexploded ordnance or whatnot. Now I understand them. Some people are like, "You're talking about explosives. Stop it! You're hurting my feelings. Take it out of D&D." Okay, I get it. But we do have an equal and an equal variety of said things in our classic Dungeons and Dragons. We have explosive glyphs, and we have, I don't know, magic items. You could even establish some kind of strange magical, like, fraying or something. Like, apparently someone cast a fireball and it didn't detonate yet, and it's sitting under a thin layer of dirt, and you just stepped on it. And it's like, who the hell cast this fireball? It's got a green tinge to it. I know who did that. Damn it. I mean, I suppose you could have things like that instead of gun turrets. I suppose you could have wands, rods, and or stabs on pivot mounts being fired across the landscape or something. I'm being rather ridiculous with this, but war movies also tend to have the high action part, and then war movies also have the lulls in the action, and a lot of times the lulls in the action have to deal with, let's go with the social part of it, right? The social part is when the band of brothers get together and they talk about their past, their present, and their future. It's when they assess their wounds and get together and find out who's alive and who's dead. They interrogate prisoners. They remain hidden in locations that might not be appropriate for where they're hiding at. They come across innocents that exist out in the world who want no parts of the conflict, but could be an ally, could be an enemy. They could be threatened and making a moral decision. So if you're someone who is like dungeon crawling, I want to tell a story. I want growth for my character. I want to tell a story about interaction with important NPCs or something. Now, Deadman says, Warhammer 40K has several worlds where there's a continual war going on. Katat, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this. Katachan is one example of a death world, or Katachan, or Satashan. Okay, anyway, Katachan is the most infamous imperial death world in the galaxy. It is located in the Ultima Segmentum and is covered in dense jungle. The planet's entire ecosystem seems constantly hostile. That's what I'm talking about, where there could be a continuous flow of constant hostility where the PCs are located. And I brought this up before. I'm not sure exactly if anybody would prefer to do it this way, but I think it would be kind of cool to tie player character capabilities or even rest periods or something, or even hit dice, tie that to the population the PCs must endeavor to save and keep alive, so that it's more than the PCs fighting for themselves or fighting for other people. Whether it's yeah, Omen's like, yeah, Catachans would give the Astartes a run for their money. Why is the thing not going? And Craig, the Imperial World of Craig, is a toxic, radioactive death world in the home world of the grim and fatalistic Astra Militarium Regentum, known as the Death Corps of Craig. You know, talking about Warhammer 40K, again, that's, you know, you're talking about, you know, everlasting war. That's the whole point. War, you know, it's Warhammer 40K, 40,000, right? Hopefully 40,000 years of war. Now, incorporating my idea of incorporating traps as a in this setting, in this world, as a living byproduct of what's been happening. Again, like I said, there could be war machines that have been left half destroyed but still somewhat active. So some kind of steam gear forged monstrosity might have its single arm, and a mouth might still be active. So the arm, you know, starts to activate, trying to grab at adversaries. It thinks its programming has caused it to, you know, go after. Or hell, maybe it's just maybe it's just a proximity sensor, and the arm starts reaching for people, even though the thing is half stuck in the dust and dirt and grime or something. And of course, um, real traps, right? In military, there are real traps, whether they are trip wires to activate something. You know, the prototypical, I'm going to put a bucket of water over top of the half open door, right? There may be a number of those types of traps set up different places. And traps don't necessarily need to be lethal, but they could lead to lethality. Oh, the using an empty bottle and turning it upside down onto a doorknob, and when you go to turn the doorknob, the bottle falls on the floor and cracks. Or making a daisy chain of empty cans and attaching them over top of a door, and when someone opens up the door, it makes a lot of noise. You know, you could do the same thing with anything that like clangs, or some old chainmail, right? You take a single nail that barely is holding up the chainmail, and when someone opens up the door, the chainmail falls to the ground or makes a lot of noise, and that too could be a warning for some kind of enemies or something. Yeah. Holman says the only thing I like about them is the fact that everyone's wearing World War I gas masks. Why can't we have gas masks like they do? I guess there's a little bit of a gas mask punk. I suppose that might be like a niche kind of thing, because unfortunately there are gas masks that look absolutely cool, which is a nasty thing to say, but whatever. Yeah. Red Dice says, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there's only massive shoulder pads. Yeah. So, all right. Now, one other part of dungeon crawling is like why we're dungeon crawling. Yeah, yeah, Tesla. Yep. There's there is a that classic like gas mask slash leatherite holster bandolier style with the long arm with a blade on the end. Wow, what did my brain? Yeah, and the spats over the shoes. Yeah, that's a classic look. Um, Another part of dungeon crawling, of course, is the rewards for dungeon crawling. And I think if we're going to make a world where dungeon crawling is a thing, we have to have a reason why you're going to bother doing it in the first place. So I could imagine either, of course, we have to have a dead, ancient legacy of a great world that no longer exists. That's a very tropish. So maybe things are the player characters are out there gathering these things for themselves, of course, to survive, gain more power for themselves. That's the point of dungeon crawling. Wealth may not be necessarily measured in gold pieces, but it might be measured in trade goods of some sort. And it also might rationalize the reason for bothering to kick in somebody else's door to steal their stuff because there are limited resources. So that may be a possibility as well, especially if you could layer different motivations for different things. For example, a player character may come from an opposing faction in this eternal war that's been going on, and so they could care less about hurting someone's feelings, right? They're from, I don't know, the Dark Moon faction. I'm from the Coming Dawn faction, and Dark Moons, I can't stand the Dark Moon. I'm going to bust the door down and go into their so-called dungeon. And the PCs are like, you do realize that's a little bit you're 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 holding on to your prejudices, and the PC is like, hell yeah, kick in the door. I'm going to steal myself a flaming intelligent vorpal blade, right? So I could see that being like a realism in the world. Like, yeah, we're busting in their stuff because we are stealing their stuff, and we are murder hoboing because we need to survive for the next day. That's a trope in post-apocalypse post-apocalypsms as well. Now, when it comes to the narrativisms, the narratives, the NPCs, the connections, the growth. Yeah, Owen says the Blood Ravens, Space Marines are infamous for that, to the point they are associated with gypsies, right? Yeah, I could see like the player characters like having a name like the Blood Ravens, or I don't know, the Black Sabers, or like there might be these other mercenary style groups out there that are out there for the sole purpose of being loyal or being paid by certain members of the population trying to survive. And Omen says, I'm surprised the gypsies aren't offended by that. Yeah, because people who would be labeled as gypsies find that word to be rather offensive. It's pretty offensive I'm going to butcher this. Romani? Butchering it. So I don't mean any offense to people who identify that way. But yeah. It could be pretty offensive, which I guess not, because Warhammer's already a bit tongue in cheek with it. So it's not like, it's not like it's built around a particular group. It's more like it's pretty offensive to everyone. I mean, it's a pretty offensive game if you think about the brutality of it. So if that part of it turns you off, you're not going to go much deeper into a game when it comes to things like that, right? So I think having some kinds of enclaves that are relatively stable, and when I say relatively, maybe they are seasonal or they move with, I don't know, these bleak storms or something, or the acid rains or whatever that comes about. So when these societies move around, maybe there's some places that are traders. They deal in trade goods. Maybe there's other groups that travel around to that are like mobile farmers or something. I don't know. Those individuals and those groups could be the NPCs, that the player characters are attached to. So no one really has to be a murder hobo. Maybe they just don't see their family as often as they would have liked. Yeah. Yeah, the Blood Ravens are rumored to be an offshoot of the 1,000 Suns Traitor Legion. And I suppose in our dungeon crawling world, you could have, like, player characters could have been separated by force or choice from a larger um, enclave, right? Like, for example, there might be an enclave of, I don't know, 1,000, like the 1,000 Suns, and they then split off into groups of 6 to 10, maybe 15, that go out dungeon crawling to bring back their ill-gotten goods, for power, prestige, trading to keep it out of the hands of enemies, things like that. I could very much see something where you might even have, this might not even be localized, much like Ravnica is a whole plane or maybe a whole planet that is city sized. I could see a whole plane of existence. The entire setting is a war, period. And the the absurdity is that everyone has accepted that the war keeps going on, despite the fact that there really isn't much left to fight with, right? So that might be the one absurdity that we need to embrace. And then with the dungeons may not be necessarily dungeons at all in the classic sense of going underground. They could be massive war machines that are the size of cities. They could be the internal workings of gear and steam powered mechanisms that are now rotting or something. There could be sailing ships, like I mentioned before, like a bunch of sailing ships in a bay that's nothing but muck and mud and fungus lashed together with hand built rope bridges and things, you know. Yeah. Um, and Rickard says, war never changes. Yeah, war. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Red Dice says, a bit. If it was any more tongue in cheek, I wouldn't have room for my team talking about Warhammer 40K. Yeah, it's you have to crack the book. You have to accept the absurdity of it, shoulder pads and all, right? Yeah. Um, yeah, Owen says, in fact, due to the combat heavy nature of Death Watch, it is mostly just dungeon crawling. So, again, I'm trying to bridge the gap of the idea of our classic absurd dungeon crawling. Traps and all, dungeon monsters down there, treasure, the whole nine yards, but mixing it with a living world, right? There may be, I'll call them smaller dungeons. There could be caves that were hand formed, or places in the ground for people to hide in. No more than 3 to 5 rooms, and the player characters might have to hide their charges, their populations of, multiple dozens up to hundreds or maybe even thousands, and hide them in basically cleared out dungeons to then go out into the world to adventure forth and such. And of course there's the trope of the golden age of a grand society that we no longer see anymore. So I could imagine the dungeons being large castles or buildings or structures. Maybe there are things that float, mechanisms or islands or something that float through the air that we have no reason why they are. But of course, we love floating islands, and so maybe those become other places to adventure forth inside of. Maybe they move through the landscape and come close to, I don't know, large cliff faces, so the PCs can jump onto them as they continue their orbits or something. Or the PCs have domesticated flying things to fly up to them. Like uh, I I could see the world. I could see pulling on a lot of the threads of having something far more gritty in the world. So maybe keeping track of your resources might be very important. Um, Dead Man says, I subverted that concept in one campaign where my Space Wolf Marine, instead of killing the great T Rex like beast on the planet, he tamed it and rode it back to town. Yeah. I'm thinking of that nature, right? Like a little absurd to ride a T Rex back to town, right? But that's kind of cool, right? you know, as obnoxiously funny as it is, riding a T-Rex is like a kick-ass thing to do. So yeah, maybe that might be a thingism in this world. Like there are, I'm going to bring up the game Rifts. Maybe it's like Rifts where there are, within their own context, there's nothing wrong with it. T-Rexes, cybernetics, magic, Cthulhu, but combined together, it's a little bit absurd. So, but each of them takes its own portion seriously. I don't know. Red Dice says, well, to use your apocalypse scenario, what if dwarves died out ages ago in the campaign world? Then, when the apocalypse hits the other races, um, they have to colonize the old dwarven mines and caverns, but the last dwarves built in protections to stop their tech falling into the wrong hands, giving justification for some traps and guardians. I I'm with that. I absolutely I think yes, I understand like the comment that I read from I read about the absurdity of like, yeah, kind of cool to have to jump, run, and flip to stand on a pressure plate 20 meters above to open up a door, but maybe the dwarves designed it that way for the sole purpose of keeping their crap safe so people don't break into their home while they're on vacation. Yeah, I could see that. And you know, dwarven dwarven mines and manufacturing as an excuse to have traps in a dungeon would kind of make sense, especially if the dwarves were the primary race that built the surface world and the underworld in this post-apocalyptic world. I'm down with that. Dwarves aren't often given a lot of respect in that regard, so I'm I'm feeling that. Okay, all right. Now, Rickard says part one, okay? Played in a game where the premise was that a conquering empire teleported any conquered people, criminals, down into an Underdark-esque cave system. It was random where people got teleported, so you would come across some of the other people. So, while exploring the cave system to find a way out, you might gather the splintered peoples and form cities and camps um, down in the very in the everything will try to kill you cave. Yeah. And Red Dice says, "Man, I really want to run a dwarf apocalypse game now." Um, I'm 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 feeling that, Rickard. Like the maybe the world isn't devastated. It could be like a prison planet. That makes a perfect excuse for like traps and a random assortment of individuals, especially if they're like teleported down. Or hell, we've even seen trash planets where like the refuse of society, both people and their trash, are dumped somewhere. And hey, listen, you can do whatever the hell you want there. We'll come back for you after 17 cycles or something like that. And they're like, how long is that? It's 170,000 years, right? Um, yep. And definitely, whether it's post-apocalypse or it's prison, you always have to have factions, right? And who joins the faction, and why should you join the faction? We've How many times have we seen prison movies where people are divided by race, or they're divided by religion, or they're divided by the old guy versus the noob that comes into the prison, right? And despite every attempt to buck the system, it's like, hey, either you're with us or you're against. Yep. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Omen's like divided by gender. Yep. I saw it. I saw it there, Omen. Yep. Divided by gender. Divided by so you the PCs, the people playing the game, might find that dividing yourselves up this way might be absolutely ridiculous and pointless, and rather like working against the very nature of what you're trying to do, i.e., there's no particular reason why people in prisons, um, I don't know, don't unite, but they don't because, of course, again, it's survivalism, right? And people love their tribes. And so, yeah, having a society divided up this way in this world, and the PCs are just like face palming the whole time. Like, all right, really? Are we really doing this? Are we really dividing ourselves by gender? Seriously? Like, we need to live and survive. And of course, the gender divided people are like, you're the rebel, not us. Coming in here and telling us what we can or can't do. Who do you think you are, anyhow? Um, Now, let's talk a little bit about traps, just a little bit, okay? Uh, yeah, there's some pretty obnoxiously wild traps out there that really make no sense for their existence. So now I understand, much like Tomb of Horrors and every permutation after that, about a lich that's where I'm going to challenge the players or something. Hmm. I we now my first rationality was traps by accident, right? Like there's a big war, there's a lot of dangerous things hanging around, and they're only traps due to their nature. They're more like, maybe calling them traps is a bad thing. They're more like obstacles rather than traps to be set about, and are localized hazards. So that could be a thing. Now, um, the red dice brings up the dwarf apocalypse, where of course there's a race of people who have specifically created a thing to protect their stuff, protect their crap, to keep you humans out of their stuff. So I could see that. Um, when it comes to prisons, war population, I mean, um, post apocalypse, that kind of thing, having people specifically set up traps to defend their homes is a real thing. So instead of an accidental trap that has the pivot floor, and if everyone walks to one side, the floor will shift, and you fall into the fire or something. Instead of that happening to be there because it's a cool trap and having no reason, maybe it's designed because they know the people who live there are just like, we'll never go back down that hallway. We created this damn thing to keep you out and kill you. And, I suppose you could have an absurd level of ancient peoples that design these things this way. That might be a little bit too hard to swallow. I think. Red Dice Diary says, I think the only way I'd have a deliberate lethal trap is if you don't plan to go back, like a sealed tomb of something or something similar. I'm with you on that. I mean, we've seen that in pop culture, but usually it's like the timer bomb, or the irradiated location, or the I'm going to let all the animals out the zoo because I want to create this problem here. So I could see the the burning bridge trap, right? Version of, we're never going back in there anyway. So we stole all the stuff down in the deepest parts, and we're out. Let's set up the traps themselves and get the hell out of here. I suppose. Okay, I'm going to be a little bit obnoxious with this one, little Gonzo. Maybe there are mobile traps, much like mobile war machines, but you take the mobile trap and you shove the mobile trap into like the cave opening or something, or it comes down on the ground and opens up like a flower. Like it's literally, you know, goblinoids with like backpacks, and they basically take the backpack, hit a button, or open up the thing, and it becomes its own trap. And so they're like kind of like these mobile artillery traps that they spread around like mines, like landmines, and they have different functions or something, I suppose. Yeah, and yes, Omen says, I remember the Nick Cage and Con Air movie telling his daughter in a letter that we don't hold hands in prison. Yeah, no. And a prison technically has a lot of traps set up with watchtowers, multiple levels of being watched themselves, multiple levels of walls and locked doors and things to keep people away. Eh, Moats, you could throw them in there. Maybe not too many pit traps, but whatever. Yeah, Rickard says, stay away from anyone wearing a red bandana, newbie. You don't want to make an enemy of the cult of the blood god on your first day, at least to survive one night here, newbie. And I think I like that, because I think I suppose you could combine war, prison, apocalypse, trash world, all into one, especially if the factions are battling each other. I mean, if you have a whole world that's like a prison planet, you know, maybe the guards of this planet aren't aren't very far removed from the people that are running around on the planet, especially if you have to dungeon crawl before the authorities come after you, which that actually is a great tension timer, right? Like the authorities roll around in some kind of floating fortress or something, and they drop down these very difficult to fend off stormtrooper styled heavy artillery um, equipped soldiers of sorts to keep law and order. So you have to survive dungeon delve because you have a time limit. Get get to the things you need to steal. Get past traps that are set up by other factions who are like, "Hey, that crap is our stuff, and we're setting up the landmines around our area where we're like scoping it out and stealing our own things and scavenging." And then if you don't get the stuff in a certain amount of time, those stormtrooper-esque individuals will come after you and blow you away, right? I'm liking this a little bit. Um, Rickard goes on to say, dungeon crawling and traps. Have anyone mentioned the Cube movie series? Ooh, Cube. I think there was one I remember seeing called 13 Ghosts. That reminds me, I didn't see the Cube series, but here's a little bit of an absurdism. Maybe the gods, and you could describe the gods in any way, shape, or form you want, are using this as the PCs understand that they are under they're in a zoo of sorts by the gods. Hey, we snatched you up. We're throwing you into this place. You need to survive, right? Or maybe it's kind of a limbo. Hey, you know what? You did a bunch of funky things in life. We're just going to pluck your ass into this world and leave you there and see what happens. Maybe that's a thing. Ooh, Tesla says the gods are scientists and we are rats in a maze. Erase the the question mark. Yeah, that I could see that, especially if the scientists are the equivalent of like you could rationalize them as like warlock and cleric patrons or something. Yeah, Deadman says the Cube, Cube 2, Hypercube, and Cube Zero. I don't remember seeing any of the Cube movies. Running Man comes to mind. Yeah, maybe maybe the PCs are everyone's thrown down on this world, and they are like the entertainment, the experiments that are thrown into this like plane or planetary sized that detritus filled world where things don't make sense, but they don't make sense because they've been snatched from other worlds. Ooh. Rickard says, or that Thieves Guild challenge from that terrible D&D movie. Yeah. Heck, who knows? Imagine the gods literally like have announcements that echo all over the world, and they make an announcement like attention, attention everyone in the world or something, and they're like it's the beginning of the obstacle course games, and everyone's rolling their eyes like, oh, not this again. Every 15 cycles they do this to us, and the PCs are like, what are you talking about? And you see everybody like stretching. They're like, stretch. Yeah, let me do my Pilates. Minotaurs and goblins and stuff, and the PCs are like, what the hell's going on? And all of a sudden they're like, and on your marks, get set, go. And everybody starts running, and PC's like, where are we supposed to run to? And everyone's shrugging their shoulders like, I don't know. We're just supposed to run and keep running. We got to run for 3 days and nights, because if you stop, you're dead. Ooh, Tesla says the Maze Runner. Yeah. Again, I don't think reading the two comments that I mentioned earlier, this might be a little bit too gonzo for that individual. He's probably rolling his eyes right now if he's listening to the show. Like, really, you're going to make a whole world about the very nature of the thing that like pissed me off and takes me out of it? But I suppose if you okay, there's two ways we can think about this. One is this world could be a one-off, meaning like you know what, guys, I know we've been doing this really, we've been focusing on our horror theme, and maybe we need a change. So this world could be the one-off world where anything goes, and it's the place where the PCs, the people in your group can go to just take a break from the normal routine. Or if you want to make this an entire setting where you're in the setting, we might need to come up with some pretty concrete rationales for what we're doing. Even if those rationales are confusing, um, the gods tend to be rather confusing and a little bit uh, deaf in the ear. Um, Coming up with like maybe certain regions that some of the gods control, or when the scientists guilds perform certain actions, maybe we understand that, oh, well, there is a reason why there's acid rain, because they're spewing down chemicals to see our reactions, or they're trying to change the texture of the air, and for 30 days and nights the air becomes poisonous, so we're going to have to go underground or something, right? Like I could see doing that, and instead of seasons, there are things where the world shifts and changes rather drastically to create these obstacles and things the players need to go through. Yeah, Rickard goes on to say, everyone is talking about the Running Man or the Thieves Guild challenge. Rickard continues to say everyone is put into a death maze and people bet on who will die first and such. And that might be what is the role playing game that is literally a dungeon battle delve for like points as a sporting event. I know Dead Man knows this. I know you know this. Um Blood Bowl. Oh, I can't think of it. But there is a ridiculous like team event, dungeon delving team event role playing game uh, that takes the ridiculousness of dungeon delving to the point of making it a sporting event. Is it? That's why I said Blood Bowl. Is it Blood Bowl? There's got to be an image of it somewhere. Yeah, Rick says, uh, yeah, Red Dice says there was a dungeon supplement for Blood Bowl. Ricker says, quote, so you owe the syndicate and you failed to pay up, but we are not without mercy. There is this sports event and we want you to win it. If you do, your debt is cleared. Yeah, I could. It's a little Blood Bowl fantasy football. That is a thing. Okay. Blood. Wow. Hey, we thought we were wrong, but we were mistaken. Yeah, Blood Bowl. That's it. Yep. Whether you've joined us from the minor leagues or already have a horde of championship trophies, here you'll find everything you need to compete in the newest season of Blood Bowl. Um, yeah, pretty ridiculous, I guess. I think there is a way to reframe and recontextualize this to be a little bit less like do 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 and make it more serious. Um, Being under the watchful eye, being within the hands of angry gods is a it is a trope. So I'm thinking, like, for example, you could make the Blood Bowl just a portion of the world, a region of the world, and how people are surviving in this world, and anything from we love gladiator competitions of any type in role playing, right? The classic gladiators and the PCs have to fight in the gladiator arenas. There could be something known as like the rafter games, where specifically things are placed into dungeon delving places to test the mettle of the players to see if they can find the thing and get it back before they die from the other teams. Blood Bowl video game. Blood Bowl is a turn-based strategy video game adaptation of the popular Games Workshop miniatures game, originally developed for MS-DOS computers by Destiny Software Productions and published by Micro League. I did not. Why don't I remember that? Wow. I need to get my geek cred back up. Jesus. Anyway, sorry about that. The I could see this being part of the world. Like, hey, if you want to join our legion of real dungeon delvers, you need to survive the rafter games or something, right? And we're gonna it's the test by the crime syndicates or whatever to see if you've got what it, or your group, your mercenary group, has what it takes. The Chaos League, fantasy sports. Now, mind you, uh, some players may not really even want to do the whole like sports league announcers team event, the wearing of team colors. But I would say that maybe this isn't too far off. We do have a we do have the our mythological restructuring of what nights and tournaments look like, right? No matter how real we think they used to be, there is our fantasy version of nights and tournaments, and maybe that's something that does go on in this world. Meaning, like there might even be people who are pretty powerful and even pretty skilled who've never done a dungeon delve in their life, but it's just because of the tournaments. And the tournaments could be pretty damn bloody. They could maybe those tournaments happen over a couple of days' time. Like they're put into places that are like the size of cities, and there's food and magic items and hell, there might even be power ups and power boosts and hell, there might even be locations to get, hey, if we make it back to our respawn place, we can get our fellow to be resurrected if we just put him on the respawn location or something. Like I think you could really frame this into something pretty serious. Maybe a player character used to be a noble who's been put into these games and is pissed off because I'm a blue blood. I used to be a noble, and everyone's like laughing at him, like, yeah, right. um, Rickard says the Iazon cartel or Lozon cartel just activated their hunter card. The syndicate team will have to be on their guard as the scale slither is dropped into their arena of the maze. Will they survive this challenge? Will they? Hell, you could even Cameron. Hey, what's going on there? Maybe, just maybe. I wonder how cool it would be for the player characters to populate and design their own dungeon to defend it from enemies that are trying to go into their maze of sorts. So the player characters could be laying in wait when a trap goes off or an alarm goes off and they're being sieged, and the player character's like, uh-oh, all right, let's hey, you bard, go and move the movable walls in our maze, and hey, I'm the cleric, I'm gonna go out there and activate the undead, or whatever. You can have some fun with it. Yeah. Red Dice is like, if only D&D had some way we could measure the different levels of competitor ability. That wouldn't be measured in, oh, I don't know, character class levels. It's a literal realism of the world. Like, oh, you got 3 stripes? Yeah, I got 3 stripes. Oh, you're third level, huh? Yeah, I moved up in the world, right? Zero level is tryouts. Rickard says, I just have 2 different groups compete for who can complete a dungeon delve or a dungeon dive. Yeah, have two groups or more. What a great way to assemble a ragtag group of monsters, or NPCs, or hell, even make up a bunch of player character classes that are third level as well because they got their 3rd stripes to compete against the player characters to get into the dungeon to steal the thing for the sole purpose. Like maybe the thing isn't a magic item, maybe it's just like a trophy or a flag, capture the flag, and to get the flag back to appease the higher ups or something. Um, yeah, Ricker continues to says DMs um, uh, would would be arbiters or from the other team's team. Okay. You're saying like the DM, the DM would be uh, a real function in the world. could be kind of fun. Red Dice says we call the tryout games the funnel. Yeah, break out your DCC, your Dungeon Crawl Classics. You're gonna need it, right? Yeah, a little ridiculous, I think. A little crazy there. I didn't expect it to go into Blood Bowl region, talking about a world where dungeon delving is and dungeon crawling is a real thing in a real world. But it seems like people have already thought about this, I think. But I still like the idea of combining this with a trash dump world, a Blood Bowl world, a post-apocalyptic world, a world at war. I'm feeling all of this kind of stuff because maybe, just maybe, there is a there's a the socioeconomic impact of people competing this way is only done because everyone knows they're the crab in the barrel, right? They know they're not getting out, or at least there have been enough generations that everyone has already have relegated themselves to, like, you know what, we're not getting out of here. So the only way for me to survive is to be on top, right? Like, there is no other way. I'm going to be my own man. I'm going to sit on top of the world. And of course, you could make the claim, well, if you want to do that, couldn't you do that without bothering other people? But the reason for going to war to battle other people is because those other people are potential threats to your surviving, your ability to survive. Um, yeah. There's also Blood Bowl 2, made by Cyanide Games. What a name. Cyanide Games, for PS4 and Xbox One. Ooh. Now, um, this is also a great way to, you guys know, we're going to talk about Third Pillar Thursday, talk about this on Third Pillar Thursday, but this is also a great way to have people spotlight and throw in a ton of working together, right? Like, if all four members of your team must get across the finish line, whatever that finish line may be, climbing to the top of the tower, making it through obstacles or something, the weakest members of the group, while they might be weak, are still necessary to survive, right? So if the wizard is the slowest member of the group because he's just like, I got an eight constitution, I can't keep up with you guys, the barbarian running around to the back of the group to ensure that the wizard gets pushed ahead, it makes a lot of sense. So working together, having lots of obstacles, having a big potpourri of enemies and maybe even allies. And between games, I can see between competitions in this world, that's where you have your drama, your narration, your social interactions, um, you know, lying, stealing, cheating, making deals, making allies, having your loyalties divided between family, lifestyle, race, gender, classmates, um, the breaking and reforging of old connections with new connections, like, much like in real life, two football players footballers, whatever version of football you consider, could have been raised. I mean, they were great classmates when they were in school, but now that they're out, they're on opposite sides of the team. And do you, in a bloody world, do you go whole hog against the person who was your best friend, or do you, like, let him go because your best friend, if he loses, this is his third game. If he loses his third game, he's probably going to be beaten in his town square for failing, right? Because he's part of the Blood Raven team or something. I just pulled Blood Raven because I remember you guys talking about it, right? Like, you could have those kind of things, or hell, you could even have um, you can have love affairs. You can have different political machinations about different teams coming and breaking apart and whatnot. Hell, people getting poisoned and assassinated outside of these competitions as well. So I think you could have, as wild as this is, I think you could have a lot of fun. Anyway, so Rickard says, It's like, no, I'm saying that like 5 DMs and 5 times 4 players, and divide them into 5 teams, 1 DM and 4 players, and the DM does not DM their team, they DM the other team. Oh, you mean like a living world? So like you could have, like through your example, you could have like a convention game, not convention. You could do this online, but the my brain is thinking of different tables, all of them going through the same dungeon dive, each of them having a different DM who is not DMing their team, but each DM wants their team that's at another table to win. Sorry, that's a convoluted way of something simple that you mentioned. Anyway, Rickard says, have it like a con game to see which team wins. Why didn't I just read that part? That, or have the DM be just referees and not be part of the game. Maybe one DM that walks between the tables as the head ref. I think something like that has been done in a weird kind of way, and I could see, like, could you imagine there's a competition to see who's the best, only because they're trying to assemble the very best to then form yet a better team whose only purpose is to join in a great battle or a war, or to be ascended to another level or something like that. Like, have we competed for you, angry gods? And the gods are like, yeah, up to me. Yeah, you did pretty good. You are now ascended. Yeah, I'm feeling this. I'm feeling this a lot. Anyway, guys, we have come to the end. Thank you very much for joining in our weekly discussion of like dungeon crawling. Like, is it dead? Does it still exist? I'm pretty sure this discussion didn't assuage or reinforce anyone's particular opinion on one side or the other, but I feel like skipping it is probably where I'm at right now. Like, would I default to a dungeon delve or a dungeon crawl? No, but I don't think we should get rid of it. That's where I'm at right now. But believe you me, my mind could be changed, but I'm not there yet. Oh, by the way, this weird shirt that just to let you guys know, I did visit yet another castle in Ohio. I went to, let's see if you guys can see it. I went to Ravenwood Castle, and I posted some pictures and things on my Facebook feed and whatnot. Just having some fun. I liked both castles that I visited most recently, Landol's Mohican Castle and Ravenwood Castle. So that was kind of cool. If you're wondering why, he's got a pink shirt with ravens on it. I should have brought that up with the Blood Raven thing, but that's my own mistake. Anyway, guys, have a good time. I will be in the Discord for a short amount of time, but please like, share, subscribe, follow, all the necessary things to trick the algos if you would like to support long-form content. Guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great one. Bye. Now here's awkwardly waiting for the I guess I don't have one of those videos anymore. That's really strange. So I guess I don't have my outro video. So you're going to have to look at my ugly face. Bye.